Welcome to Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer, the podcast that will increase your enjoyment of craft beer, or do you call it local beer, and the people who make it. We have traveled to the Logan Square neighborhood of Chicago to go from grain to glass with David Blackford. He is the lead brewer from Revolution Brewing, one of the OGs of local brewing in Chicago. We're going to touch on a beer myth, and as always, share the stories that make each brewer unique. I'm beer drinker and hellraiser Brian Noonan, and all my opinions are strictly my own, for good reason. Behind the cameras, our executive producer Cody Goff, and with me as always is the high priestess of hops, the matriarch of malts, the femme fatale of fermentation, the siren of suds, the regent of remote podcasting. She's co-owner of Exit Strategy Brewing Company, Katherine Vallow. Hello, Katherine.
Hello. I have to tell you, I woke up today and was like, today is the day. And I have been nervous for this interview all day because I ride real hard for Revolution.
Well, listen, David sent a 8-page rider for what he needed for this interview, so I could see why you were nervous. There's a lot of demands. We've met 94% of them. Yes. I'm hoping he doesn't...
All green M&Ms.
There's nothing but green M&Ms.
And Cody a Pomeranian to dry your hands on?
Cody hasn't been allowed to look at David directly.
I'm not big on eye contact. I'm not
so
going to lie.
So if you notice me shifting this way, that's where the 4% wiggle room kind of comes in. Yeah. All right. Well, you are in Florida. What is one drink in Florida when they're going to interview the lead brewer for one of the OG breweries in Chicago?
I know it was after I cried myself to sleep and I was like, I forgot that I can't. I'm so used to being able to get Rev wherever I want to get Rev that I went to our local, one of our local stores and was popping around the beer aisle. And I was like, where are my session sours? Where's my freedom of speech?
Yep.
And then was reminded that I don't live in Illinois anymore.
That's right.
Which
or
then made
one
me
of the
more
10
sad.
other
Anyway.
states that Rev is distributed in.
Well, I mean, I don't know where it's not here, which is unfortunate, but that's fine. So, I today have a blonde, just 4.5% easy blonde ale from Sun Lab. They're out of Miami. It's a really solid blonde. I didn't know what I was in the mood for, so I went with an umbrella beer, right? Like a beer that covers all the bases. And you?
I have a flight of some of Revolution's finest. I have Cold Time, which is the new Pilsner that we'll talk, or the lager that we're going to talk about later. It's brand new from Revolution. I have Ghost Ride, which is a Kolsch that both my wife and I love. Split Season, which is a newer beer. It's a farmhouse ale, a saison, and it was actually brewed here in the pub, and I'll get to why that's different from being brewed at the brewery with David in a minute. And then I have the pills, the Rev pills. So
so my first question: how do I get the farmhouse? Can you send me your glass?
All right, sure.
Send it through the screen.
You can drink it vicariously through me. And Cody has a Sun Crusher, big full pour of the Sun Crusher wheat.
I'm going to crack open one of these Cold Times myself, so I'll be working on that.
With the premium lager to get us started.
That's awesome.
All right, so David, first of all, welcome. We're glad you're here. As you can see, Katherine is all flustered. I am trying to maintain my composure.
Yeah, welcome.
And not look right at you. But I'm gonna, so hopefully that doesn't cause a problem. And we're kidding. I'm kidding about the rider. David's very nice to be here today.
Yes.
So what we usually do is we start with a myth.
Okay.
And I know the myth Katherine has for us today is way over my head, so I'm glad you are here to either back it up or debunk it. Katherine, what is your science myth today?
The myth, which I'm very excited to talk about, is about top fermenting and bottom fermenting yeast. Because as we know, beer's got 4 main ingredients, right? Water, hops, barley, yeast. We talk a lot about hops. We talk a lot about barley. We talk hardly ever about water, which we probably should at some point. But today we're talking about the importance of yeast and top fermenting yeast and bottom fermenting yeast. And the myth is that they all ferment, all yeast just ferments the same, which is not true. The only truth to it is that all yeast at some point will circulate throughout a fermenter, but all yeast does not ferment the same, right? So you've got 2 different kinds of yeast. And I I can turn it over to Dave, or I can keep going and we can talk after this spiel about.
David, what are the two kinds of yeast? And is it yeast?
Well, I kind of liked when you were explaining it, because then if there was anything that I didn't know, it wouldn't look like I didn't know it. But,
all right, cool. I can.
Usually, ale yeast is what people refer to as top fermenting yeast, and lager yeast is bottom fermenting. That's kind of how it's normally split up. So that's kind of where people go with that. Top fermenting yeast, ale yeasts prefer warmer temperatures in general. Lagers slightly cooler, and there is some crossover and some fancy scientific names and things like that, but they are both essentially yeasts that have different preferred living conditions, I guess I'll say.
They do. And then so you've got your top fermenters, Saccharomyces cerevisiae.
That sounds right to me. Yeah.
Wow,
yeah,
nice
yeah.
flex.
And then you've got your bottom fermenting yeast, and that's Saccharomyces. Hang on, I got it.
She didn't write it out
Pasteuranius.
phonetically.
Yeah, Pasteuranius.
Yes, that's
right.
Yeah, again, sounds correct. Yeah. We don't pronounce these that much at the brewery.
In the world of yeast, you have the drunk uncle, and the drunk uncle of yeast is Quebec yeast.
Okay. Yeah.
That shows up to the family gathering already toasted with a bottle of Jaeger.
Yeah.
Because Quebec will do whatever it wants, however it wants, whenever it wants.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we've used that yeast. I've been hearing a lot about it in the past few years. And it's fun to just constantly be learning about all these different yeasts from all over the world and how they can be used to create different end results in beer. I think the Quebec yeast, people get excited about that because you can just kind of let it rip in the fermenter. It'll ferment out really fast and still produce usually a clean profile, which things like ale yeasts, sometimes if you let them get too hot, they give off a lot of unwanted esters and aromatics and things like that. So, we've used that a few times. Our innovation brewer, Andy, is a big advocate for those yeasts as well.
So when you say they ferment out for non-brewers and brewer types, what does that mean? Yeah,
so the reason I kind of think about all yeast the same, even though there's a million different ways to classify them, is because they're all kind of doing the same thing, and that's essentially just eating sugar that we feed them and producing alcohol and carbon dioxide, which is carbonation, essentially. So fermenting out is basically just the yeast consuming as much sugar as they can before they give up, essentially. And that's kind of what we're measuring when we ferment a beer. We know how much sugar we start with and what we're planning on finishing with once all the yeast have done their work.
Very nice.
Yeah.
So did we debunk this, Katherine? Did we support it? What are we doing?
Oh, no. I mean, this was one of those where we debunked it based purely on science. Right? Yes, yeast is yeast, and it's a great umbrella term to talk about, but it's really important, I think, when you're talking about beers and specifically designing beers, the kind of yeast that you're referring to, right? Top fermenting, bottom fermenting, Quebec, some of the other strains that are out there, the esters that they produce, the phenols that are coming off of them. This is just one of those things where it's not like, I just threw some yeast in a bucket. You're like, no. Maybe, but probably not. You probably thought about it more, right? So, all right. Debunked.
Very good. Well, now that we have debunked our myth, let me reintroduce our guest. David Blackford is the lead brewer. He also assists with managing brewhouse operations for Revolution Brewing. Now, this is, you might be tricky. There are two fantastic locations. We are actually at the brew pub and restaurant and the original tap room and brewery here at 2323 North Milwaukee Avenue in Chicago. The production brewery and that tap room is at 3340 North Kedzie in Chicago. You're not going to remember that. So just go to revbrew.com and then you can figure out where you want to go. It's that easy. David, first of all, again, welcome. But you have been now. Revolution started. We're going to do a little history on Revolution because as much as everybody in Chicago and the surrounding states, everybody knows Revolution. You guys have been around for a long time. Mm-hmm. Some people who may be watching us in Guam, they don't know, and we're big in Guam, David. I don't know if we told you that when we pitched this to you.
I've heard, yeah,
gigantic in Guam. So, Revolution is the largest independently owned brewery in Illinois. Mm-hmm. Opened in 2010, right downstairs.
Correct. Yeah,
Josh
and upstairs
Death
too.
Is the
yep.
was
Death.
He's the man.
Yep. Yeah. Death.
I'm sorry,
but Death, it works very well because we use that in our
that's we use it in
Death Star.
Use it in the beer.
Yeah.
Yes. All right. So Josh Death. Sorry, Josh. Yeah. I was this many days old when I learned how to pronounce your name. All right. So Josh Death started it in 2010. Then in 2012, they opened the production brewery over on Kedzie, and in 2014 you joined. So you've been here pretty much the whole run of Revolution.
Yeah, I mean, give or take a few years, but so I used to I'll go back a little bit. Like I used to live across the street from here, like right when the brew pub opened in 2010. So I knew about Revolution from the beginning, and was just kind of getting into craft beer at the time. And we used to just come here and like after friends. After other jobs, come here and have some beers and eat some really good food. And man, I had a couple beers early on that I had just never had anything like before. One of them was Eugene, which we still make, the porter. I wasn't big into hops at that point, but Anti-Hero was on tap and it was still tasting, as good as it does today. Working Man Mild. There was just all these. There's such a diverse menu back in 2010. I had never had anything like that. So. I knew when I started like trying to get into craft beer that this was the place that I wanted to work for.
Okay.
And that happened, in 2014. And I started at the production facility on Kedzie as a packaging specialist.
Packager? Yeah. Okay. Put beers in boxes?
Yeah. So at that point, actually, I mean, you really nailed the history there. So Josh kind of started this company with his wife, Krista. Jim Seebeck, who he knew, that's our brewmaster. Okay. He knew him from Goose Island. And even before this place opened up, they were, making homebrew recipes in Josh's basement, coming up with Working Man, Mild, Cross of Gold, Golden Ale, things like that, Anti-Hero. Jim, we could talk about forever. He's got his resume is pretty stacked, I would say. Before he came here, Three Floyds and Firestone Walker and Goose Island, and so those guys just kind of with the help of some other employees and management and investors, just got hit the ground running with this place at a time where, I mean, people were very thirsty for craft beer in Chicago, and still are. But I mean, there were not nearly as many breweries as there are now. So that was very exciting. Other
than the excellent beer, do you think the fact that Revolution got in on it kind of at the ground floor has helped their longevity?
Yes and no. I think that I think the beer has been the number one thing for them because it helps to get that early start, but there's a lot of breweries that started after us in other parts of the country that have really taken off. I think that they made some smart decisions early on and kind of went for it. And with the beer and the quality of the beer to back it up, I think it was kind of a no-brainer.
Now, I've mentioned you're the lead brewer, and you mentioned Jim is the brewmaster.
Yes.
What is the differentiation between lead brewer and brewmaster? Other than a really cool business card.
Yeah, master in the title.
Yes.
So every company kind of does it a little bit differently, but the brewmaster is the master. He's at the top. So Jim, some people refer to that as head brewer, but lead brewer. My position is I supervise the brew house team at our brewery, which at our brewery we separate the production floor into packaging, cellar, and brew house. So I work with Jim, Evan, who is our director of brewery operations, to just make sure that the brew house keeps running smoothly, that the beers keep tasting the way we want them to and being brewed the way we want them to. Jim, who's the brewmaster, oversees just about everything that has to do with our beer. Yeah.
Now, we've talked to a lot of brewers, and a lot of them had been, as you mentioned with Jim, at a lot of places. Mm-hmm. You came to this, you weren't at a lot of places before you got the job at the brewery you had decided you wanted to work at. How did that come about? Yeah,
so it's funny, Katherine mentioned not being able to get Rev beer in Florida, and I actually, shortly after 2010, I moved to Burlington, Vermont, and there was a lot of great beer out there, but I was definitely missing Rev beer for sure. So like when I moved back home, or back to Chicago, I should say, in about 2011, 2012, something like that, I knew that I wanted to work in the industry, and I sent my resume to basically every brewery that I could commute to.
Yeah.
And only one got back to me, and that was Finch's Brewing. So I worked there for about 6 months.
Okay.
And then a former employee of Finch's started working at Revolution, so I made the move over. Yep.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
How is it different working at Illinois' largest independently owned brewing, a brewer that is known nationally, award-winning, coming with such a short tenure at a small brewery, like almost being thrown into the deep end right away?
Yeah. Well, it's funny because when I started at Revolution in 2014, I think 2013 we did about 24,000 barrels out of the production facility, which is significant. But they were hiring because the goal for 2014 was about 50,000. So they were looking to double production. And we had just gotten a centrifuge, which helps speed up the process of clarifying beer and just increases our output capacity. So it really was kind of a whirlwind that first year because there was just so much growth happening. And we eventually caught up to the pace of it. But yeah, I just
baptism by fire.
Yeah, exactly. That's the phrase. Just kind of learned a lot. There was a lot of great. It's funny. Like when I started at Revolution, I was one of the only people that hadn't worked at Goose Island. Everyone knew each other from Goose.
Well, at that time, we had started. I mean, in 2010, the city had started its craft expansion, but it hadn't hit it quite like 2014, 2015 when it was like everyone, right?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean that it makes great sense. You were at Goose at some point.
Yeah, it just exploded. But luckily, all my coworkers had that former training and all that knowledge that came with working at a Chicago institution of a brewery. So being able to work with people like Jim and everyone else that was there helping out at the time is pretty awesome.
Do you remember the first beer you got to work on?
That's a great question. So I guess, we have the luxury of having a few different brew houses at this company. So the one that I work on, kind of my everyday production job is working with our 150 barrel brew house over at Kedzie. The company started downstairs with our 15-barrel brew house, so much smaller. And then we even have a pilot system at Kedzie now that's about a barrel. So a barrel is 31 gallons for anyone. Yeah.
I love pilot systems. They are the cutest.
Not to be too inside, but Cody and I were lucky enough to go behind the scenes one. Is that the little brewery in the back?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So, the first beer that comes to mind, I think this is true, is that I submitted a recipe for a pub beer, so a 15-barrel batch downstairs. That was a golden ale, like a higher ABV golden ale, called Levon. Because I think I just wanted to make a beer for Levon Helm.
There you go.
Yeah. So that was, but no, it turned out really well, and we have a system where anyone at the company can submit recipes, and it's evolved over the years, but I think that was probably the first one.
What's for people who are watching now, wait, he worked 6 months at a brewery. Now he's the lead brewer. How does that work? What's your trajectory throughout Revolution? Now, again, it's been 10 years, so you've been here a while and paid your dues.
Yeah. I mean, anyone that's in the industry or even, paying attention to the craft beer industry knows that it's really kind of moves quick, like a lot has changed in the past 10, 15 years. Yeah. And so there's a lot of opportunity that came with that. So, like I said, the growth rate that happened at Revolution around 2014 really helped me kind of achieve my goals at the company of just being able to work with people that are very open and generous with their knowledge. So learning as much as I could about the process. And, when a position opened up in the cellar, I was able to move into the cellar. Same thing with the brew house and then with my current title now. So, it's just been a process of learning as much as possible. And also just working your ass off, which is kind of the common thread that runs through anyone in craft beer.
That's it.
Yeah.
Now, kids, I hope you've been listening to that.
Yeah.
We've mentioned this many times. Everybody
no
thinks, working at beer must just be a blast. And I'm sure it's fun, but it's also a lot of work.
Sometimes we joke because sometimes we'll be, a tour will come by and we'll all be in the lab going like this with a beer. It's not staged. It's just like we're checking the clarity on something and drinking it. But we're like, okay, that's what everyone thinks that our job is now.
It is super fun. And it's also a business. It's hard.
It is.
But just to play on the walking through and like holding the tiny, it's these tiny
they
glasses,
don't
right?
see
like you
you
collect
just
them
like,
all for your like those 5-ounce glasses that you get from every festival or whatever. There are times at 8:00 in the morning where you're like, I have to see where this is at, and I have to taste it right now. And people are like, oh my God, you're drinking all day. How wonderful. And you're like, no, I just want like a granola bar and to get my day going. But instead I'm sitting here.
We do like blind spike trainings.
Right. Like I'm just going to swish some beer around my mouth at 8 a.m. to make sure that I don't have any off flavors.
What's a blind spike training?
Yeah, we do trainings. Kristen that works in our QC lab, we do these weekly trainings to help identify off flavors. So there's some common off flavors that can come up in beer fermentations, and we want to make sure that we can detect those. So we have a group of tasters that train to identify those. And what they are is that you take these like horrible off flavors like there's things like diacetyl is a very common one that's like a buttery kind of flavor and aroma, but there's also things like isovaleric acid, which I believe is like the sweaty people use sweaty socks as a descriptor. So anyway, we're like dosing this like lovely delicious cold time that I'm drinking right now. We're like dosing in smelly feet flavor. It's like I don't always want to be drinking this, but it's part of the job. We got to do it,
And somebody says that's where I want to be in the company.
Yeah, that's what I want to do.
The person who tries the nasty stuff and points them out. Before we get into, rarely does Cody have a input a lot on the interview. But today,
yes,
I've mentioned he is a aficionado, a devotee, a slave to the Deepwood series.
Love it.
But before we get to that, Rev has been so good about anticipating and going with not the trends, not chasing trends, but just evolving and adding so many beers and so many styles to their portfolio. When it comes to you, and you've been brewing here, as I said, for 10 years, do you have certain styles that you just love to brew?
Well, yeah, it's a tricky question because there's styles that are really easy. I shouldn't say easy, but just more in line with what our equipment can handle. And because I'm responsible for our brew house and our process and making sure that everything runs smoothly, there are some styles that just inherently are more challenging.
Oh, okay.
So,
such as?
Well, like peanut butter Eugene is a good example. So when you're like adding hundreds and hundreds of pounds of, like very sticky powdered peanut butter to a brew house that was never designed to do that, you got to get a little. And
it gets so weird. Like just that peanut butter powder gets so weird. It gets so something. Like, there's just no way to describe it unless you're looking at it. You're like, oh, that's cool.
Right, yeah.
Whose turn is it to clean the kettle?
Yeah. It's great beer. Rye Way is another one, like Rye Way to Heaven, which is our rye wine that we barrel age. Such an awesome beer that took a while to get going because no one really knew what it was. You know what I mean? It was like when Jim came down with that recipe, like some of the guys that had been brewing for a long time, like I think thought it was a joke where they were like, how much rye do you want to add to this beer? Like how are we going to do that? But like we do it and there's nothing like it, you know? So those beers, like I love them. I love the challenge. They're extremely difficult. A beer like Cold Time, Anti-Hero, I mean, we have that down to a science. It's pretty awesome.
What's the capacity of the main production facility now?
In terms of the equipment, like we do 150 barrel batches, but we can, in a year we could go probably over 100 barrels if we wanted to, or 100,000, I should say. Wow. So yeah, if you're in terms of capacity, like it kind of just depends on what we're looking for at the moment. We've got quite a bit, you know.
It's a lot of beer over there.
Yeah.
David Blackford is here. He is the lead brewer at Revolution Brewing. This is the point where we take a quick break. We'll come back. We're going to feature one of the beers that David is working on, one of the beers from Rev, and then, Cody, we will delve in to the Deep Woods series and how you have mortgaged away your oldest child's college fund for these delicious brews.
But only the oldest child.
Right. The youngest one gets to go.
She's good.
The oldest one, ironically, is going to be hitting you up for a job.
Hey,
so
send him down.
He's got to
packaging.
Take care of the old man's habits. Yeah. All right, let's do that. Then there's more. It's Crafty Brewers. All right, now is the time on Crafty Brewers where it's dealer's choice. David Blackford is our dealer today. He's the lead brewer for Revolution Brewing. And what are we working on today, David?
So we are enjoying ourselves some Cold Time lager, which is relatively new for Revolution. It's been out for about a year or so, but we just love this beer. I mean, it's so easy to drink. Lower ABV, under 5% ABV, extremely clean tasting, not very bitter, but it's still, you can tell it's a beer. And it's just become everyone's shift beer. We love it.
Really?
Yeah.
Is there are simpler, not simpler to brew, but a simpler beer coming back into popularity, like a low ABV and a lager that is just a clean, easy beer to drink? Is that a trend that's going up? Not to jump on trends early.
Yeah,
but...
I mean, it seems like, I mean, in my opinion, it never went away. It's just like what industry is, dominating that beer. But I don't know. In my opinion, like once lager, lighter style lager, clean tasting beer hit the scenes, however, 150 plus years ago, like people have pretty much been drinking that around the world ever since. So I think that there may have been some fatigue with craft beer in the past 10 years where, everything is just about the next biggest thing, the hoppiest thing, the craziest this or that. And I think the dust is maybe settling a little bit on that. And Cold Time for us, I mean, we have Rev Pills, which I think you got at the end of that flight there, which came first. That's more of like an American style Pilsner. So you still do have like some hop contribution to that. We had Cross of Gold, we still do, which is like a golden ale, so not a lager, but very clean tasting. But this is a very like classy beer style and beer.
Cross of Gold was part of your Chicago. Sorry, Katherine. There were like three Chicago series, right?
Yes, yeah. So Fist City, and then Cross Gold and the Rev Pills as well.
Okay.
Yeah, for those. Yeah, Fist City is another phenomenal beer, but we don't have to talk about that right now.
My boss at my other job, I told him I was coming here. He's like, not to say that you need to bring me some, but Fist City is my favorite beer ever.
Yeah,
so in
I
Milwaukee,
like this guy.
You got a guy who is, I have to pick up a 6-pack or I won't have a job tomorrow.
We'll get it for you. Yeah.
What were you going to say, Catherine?
So, Dave, is Cold Time going to be part of the core now? Is that sticking around like forever and ever, or is this one of those like we're gonna do this, we're gonna hit it seasonally and maybe come back to it?
Yeah, no, it's here to stay. It's separate from our city series. It's our year-round beer. We're just starting to put it into 6-packs. I mean, we're seeing like really good response from it. Yeah. Everyone's excited about it. So yeah, it's not going anywhere.
I am coming up in exactly 1 month I'm coming back home. And it is on my list of like immediate consumption items is like get my hands on some Cold Time.
You used an adjective clean, and when I drink this and when I drink a lot of lager, that's what I like. You're right. It tastes like beer, so you know you're drinking a beer. But it's not cloying. It doesn't. It goes down easy.
Yeah.
It leaves a clean feeling in your mouth, and you know at the low ABV you could have a few. Yeah.
I think there's still maybe a slight taboo against a beer not being overly complicated, and I mean, I think that there's something to appreciate about just a few ingredients and technique done very, very well,
Yeah,
I'm going to buy
great.
all of this beer. I'm going to buy all of this beer. Like it's
Please do.
Well, it was funny is every brewer we've talked, not to give away a question for later, Brian, but every brewer we've talked to has said that their go-to is Miller High Life. And like you said, not overly complicated, right?
Yeah.
And I don't drink a lot of Miller High Life, so I can't compare. But like, this is the kind of beer I can see a lot of people just drinking all the time.
Absolutely, yeah.
Definitely. Yeah. It's also one of the, it's been at least 2, there may have been more, beers that Revolution has partnered with a sports team. This is for the Chicago Hounds Rugby Club. Who knew? But there is a rugby club, which is great. Does the club come into you, like, do rugby players come into the brew house when you're in there and go, oi, we need more hops?
Yes, yeah, they just kind of run on the brew deck and we do what they say. No, yeah, so it's worked a couple different ways. So we are the sponsor of the rugby club. Cold Time came about independent of that.
Okay.
But then there are beers like Hazy Pitch,
Yep.
which we brewed in collaboration with the Chicago Fire. And that was more of what you're talking about, except with soccer balls. Yeah. But no, so yeah, we had a really good relationship with that club. And, I'm not sure exactly who was a part of it. That would be a more Doug and marketing question. But yeah, we had the players come in and we talked about recipes and with the team management and stuff like that.
So they had some input?
Yeah, it was collaborative. And, we ended up with a really great beer. Hazy Pitch is the beer. It's similar to our Hazy Hero beer, which is our hazy IPA, but a little bit lower in ABV. Something you would have at a 1 or 2 of at a sporting event.
There you go. At a match at the pitch?
Yeah, I think that's what they say.
Well, yeah, I watched Ted Lasso. I know all the soccer lingo now.
Yeah.
All right. I've been putting this off just to drive Cody crazy.
Yes.
Cody, where would you like to start with the Deepwood series? You have David Blackford right here. He's the lead brewer.
I'll do my best.
He knows things. He was responsible for Maple Death. Is that correct?
So yeah, kind of. Yeah, you're going to find a theme where I have a hard time taking credit for anything because it's such a collaborative environment. But
I read said that you told everybody else to go shove it, and you made Maple Death.
Yes, yeah, me and one other rugby player.
Yes,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The maple ones are maybe at the top of my list.
Awesome.
I don't know. It's been very spoiled from Revolution because Straight Jacket might be my favorite beer. It's a barley wine. It's very high ABV. And I had it, and I'm like, well, they make it all year round, I believe.
Yeah, it comes back yearly. Yeah, we have like a window where we release it. But
right.
Yeah.
So but it's relatively accessible, at least in the Chicago area. So I guess I thought to myself, well, all barley wine is good. And then I went to a couple other breweries.
Yeah.
I found out not all barley wine is good, but it's just that good. I think what strikes me about the Deepwood series, and I'm a season ticket holder, so I buy copious amounts of it every year.
Love it.
Is that it came out and, probably the other best known barrel age program in the city is probably Goose Island's, right? Obviously, they do their big Bourbon County Stout release around Black Friday. But Deepwood not only, I think it started maybe October through January, but now it's expanded to where we're recording this in July. And I think like next week, I'm going to be picking up a bunch because they're coming out in July.
The SOJ.
Oh my God. I can't wait. But it bucks so much the trend of like, there's a trend of people looking for lower ABV or even NA beers. And yet you can release like a 14, 15% ABV beer in July, which some people consider really heavy. And like, I'm into it. Other people are into it.
Yeah.
What like inspired that? How did that thought even come across you guys' minds to do that?
Yeah. That's a good question. I mean, barrel-aged beer is so cool because there's so many things you can do with it. I mean, even the concept of barrel-aged beer is kind of crazy to think about, like that someone, you know, I think we probably know who in Chicago, Goose Island, like you got to tip the hat to them a little bit for, you know, making that stuff happen back in the day. But like you can just do so much with those ingredients. And then when you throw time into the mix, we just have a lot of ideas. There's so much room to innovate with that. And the demand is there from the customer because people are realizing that like beer isn't just one thing. You know, you can call it everything beer, but you know, Cold Time is a beer, VSOJ is a beer, like, so it's all just about like the customer that wants that. And like, do you think that you have as a brewery like something to offer in that sector of beer or whatever? So we definitely do, because Chicago is like a barrel-aged beer city. And you know, Marty Scott is our barrel program manager, and he works with Jim and myself and all the brewers, and we just come up with these really innovative, awesome ideas, you know. So it's like there's room to
right,
to
like
share that.
Releasing a tropical one in July, there was
it's like, why not, you know? Like, I will say with barrel-aged beer, it's like you know, it is challenging, but if you have a really good base beer that's just simple, you know, like don't overdo it, just like create the best base beer that you can, source the best possible barrels that you can, like freshest, just like really good quality spirits in the barrel, and then just give it enough time, like it's probably not going to suck, you know? And then if you do that on a large enough scale, I mean, obviously, like we really get into it with our barrel-aged beers. So like there's, you know, there's other steps here, but like if you can blend and you have a taste for your finished product, like you can really do some cool stuff.
And on the scale, I feel like the scale is right at the sweet spot because part of the fun is getting something exclusive. And like, I feel like you guys produce just enough to hit that demand, but not so much where it's like, oh, I can walk into any Walmart and get it, or, you know, whatever. You got to kind of keep an eye on it and make sure you get it. So it just feels cool whenever I get my hands on one.
Yeah.
And you have so many taproom exclusives too.
Yeah.
So a release will come out, and then it's like, well, also check out, we've got one barrel of this amazing beer that we're only making one barrel of.
It's wild. Like, you know, Marty or Jim will bring in, we call them money barrels. It's like you taste, you know, if you're releasing Death Star and we have 90 bourbon barrels of Death Star to sample, we sample every one to make sure that they're all up to our standards. I mean, very small quantities, you know, like literally just enough to be able to tell if it's
going back to those guys are having fun all day.
Yeah, exactly. So, no, but every now and then they'll just bring in a sample of a barrel that is just like just above and beyond every single thing you would want out of it and more. And those are some of those like single keg releases that we do at our events and stuff.
So when people go into the tap room over on Kedzie at the production facility, there's a famous, and Katherine pointed this out on social, there's a famous barrel wall. Are those barrels actually in use?
Yeah.
Aging stuff. So people go in there like, ooh, there's treasure in all those barrels.
Yes, sir. Yeah. I mean, that's another reason why we don't, you know, make a crazy amount of it, because it's an incredibly labor intensive process. And you know, that's the way we have to store them. We would love to be able to have one of our big fermenters, barrel aging beer, so we didn't have to do that. But like that's how you get the best product, and I think it's awesome that like we've been able to kind of like keep that tradition going at Revolution, and there's a lot of drinkers that kind of recognize how special those beers are. And I think some people probably just haven't tried them. I mean, if you try, like, Straight Jacket is my personal favorite because the recipe is so simple. Like, it is like a very large recipe in terms of ABV, like how much sugar we're trying to get in there to feed the yeast. But like, it shouldn't work. It shouldn't taste as good as it does on paper, but like, it's kind of a magical thing, when you try that beer.
And it again, it goes against the maybe antiquated notion, and Cody pointed this out, that those are beers for the winter. Revolution has been one that has pushed, no, these are beer. If you like these beers, you can drink them any time of year.
Yeah.
Is there one that you were involved in that sticks out, other than the maple, which you were the genius behind? That's what I've read anyway.
Yep.
Is there one that stuck out, and one memorable one where somebody came with a recipe and it just didn't work?
Oh, that's a good question. We're very open, like, especially, so, okay, if you have a beer, that's just kind of an experiment, like, what if we made, I don't even know, like a mango black IPA barley wine or something like that, like, I don't know.
Cody's in line for that.
I don't know what that is, but like, we're not going to brew 150 barrels of that, like, from the jump or whatever. But like, we will like work through that flavor profile if someone has like an idea for a beer like that. A great example is our packaging team just created a mango lager that is fantastic. Like, there was a collaborative beer that they made on the pilot system, and it was just a hit, and like they kind of took a risk with those ingredients. And like, in my opinion, the more, it's like with cooking, it's like the more like different flavors you add, the more risk you're like inviting into your finished product. So yeah, the duds don't stand out to me as much as like the home runs. Nice. And I think like Rye was one. I think Rye like almost maybe was on the chopping block for a little bit before like it got some steam behind it,
because of the complexity of the recipe, or what? Just
because it's a confusing thing to like tell an audience that like maybe not familiar with that beer, and you're just like, well, try the beer, tell us what you think, and some people might think like, oh, a mango lager, like I would just rather have a regular lager. It's like, yeah, but if it's balanced and you get just a hint of that, so it's exciting to work for a place that kind of has that their eye on innovation and being able to like listen to new ideas, because I think that's kind of like what's driving the ship right now a little bit,
Before we get to our final questions that we ask all the brewers, Katherine, you can chime in on this too. Right before we started, and I forget what beer we were talking about, David, but you said the hardest part is naming the beers.
Yes.
Coming up with the recipes, that's, that's work and it's difficult, but the naming the beers is the hardest thing. And Katherine, you guys named a ton of beers. Why is naming the beer the hardest thing?
I don't know. It just, like, everything else ends up getting done before. I mean, this isn't always the case, but if I were to generalize, it's like, we have our process down pretty well. It's like, we know if we're going to market with something, like the steps to take, designs that we want, recipe formulation, all that stuff. But I don't know. For some reason, the name, it's just like, I don't have kids, but I imagine like that's a long conversation.
It is a very
some
long
people have the child after 9 months and maybe don't have a name still. And you had 9 months, But no, it's,
to be fair,
it's
I
tough.
have known people that are like, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to let this child come home without a name, and I'm going to see what name this child wants. And I'm like,
well, how did you come up with the names at Exit?
Oh, I think we were probably the anomaly, because we just had a scratch pad, because every time something stupid came out of somebody's mouth, it went on the list.
Right. Yeah.
Like, it was a lot of like beer name. Like, it was just real. Because after a while, and we also were a very small team. We were talking about like 4 people that work together every minute of every day. And so you get a little loopy and you just start saying dumb shit. And before you know it, you have a beer named like dumb shit. Like, that's the best part. I think it's the absolute best part is naming beers. I mean, the recipe creation is great and trying them and then like nailing the recipe is awesome, but naming them is great.
It really,
I also would never want the pressure of naming a child. That's no.
Right. It really makes you appreciate the good names. The ones that are, I think Cold Time is a home run.
Yeah.
I think part of why it came about is just that's like normal brewery speak for like how long a tank has been crashed, or after fermentation when it's fermenting at 52 degrees, say, you lower the temperature to 30, 32, something like that. So the amount of time that the lager is spent cold is referred to as cold time, but it's also perfect for how you're enjoying it, So, a good name.
And I think in the case of Revolution too, you're talking about such an iconic establishment in the Chicago beer world, and not even in Chicago, regionally, right? For beer, the names are so important because those names as individual brands representing Revolution, they have to be just timeless. Like Anti-Hero, people will talk about Anti-Hero from now until the end of time, and you know what it is.
Yeah, not just because of Taylor Swift either.
No, nice Taylor Swift reference.
Thank you.
Even if you barely know beer, you know Anti-Hero. You may not have ever had one, but you know the name.
Yeah. And if you don't, please come to the brewery.
I live and die for Rosa season. That's it.
Likewise.
All of the Rosa every year, bring it all to my face. It is just
that's so Rosa is our it's a wheat
beer.
ale that we use hibiscus petals steeped in the brew house like tea, and it gives it this just wonderfully
it has been one of my favorite beers
crisp,
as long as I have been drinking craft beer. It has been one of my, like, if you were like, what are your go-to beers, right? Not to give anything, but like that's forever and always in my top 3.
I love it.
Cody is flailing about.
So on the naming, so I just drank a Sun Crusher. Sun Crusher, for the uninitiated, was a starship in Star Wars that Kip Duran stole and crashed through a Star Destroyer.
Yeah, no affiliation, by the way.
I was going to say we go from science talk to nerd.
We go from grain to glass to a galaxy far, far away.
But didn't Sun Crusher come from the solar panels on the roof?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's another thing where it's like, where did it come from? It's a beer that you want to crush in summer. It's Sun Crusher.
But perfect. I think Sun Crusher, and then you've also got, it's spelled DETHS Star, which is pronounced Death Star,
right? Because
as you mentioned earlier, but clearly you'll see it and think Death Star from Star Wars.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Sure. So, but I think I'm like, all right, Death Star, Sun Crusher, clearly there's a theme. When people order a Death Star downstairs, do you correct them? Do you let people call?
No, I mean, it's Death Star. Like even our owner, Josh Deeth.
That's Josh Deeth.
Long E. Yeah. We'll say Death Star or Death Star, so it's, they're interchangeable,
Okay.
But most of my side of the brewery, that's how we hear it, just because we know him as Josh Deeth, so it's either is acceptable.
So if I'm at a party and I start telling people like, it's actually pronounced Death Star, I'm kind of lying.
Yeah,
You're kind of a douche.
I'd say
kind of come off as a douche.
Maybe don't do that.
Drink it. Don't correct somebody over the beer. Just let them drink it.
I want a fascinating piece of trivia.
VSOJ is actually pronounced Visage.
Visage.
Not a lot of people know that.
Would you like to enjoy some Visage after your Death Star?
Tell them it's Swedish. It's just it's Nordic. It's Visage.
We send beer to Sweden, actually.
Very nice.
Very small amount.
Very small amount?
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the big 3. David, this is the time when we ask the brewers the same 3 questions.
Okay.
Number 1, the hill you'll die on. That's a beer that no matter how popular it gets, no matter how many people are clamoring for it, you just do not want to brew it.
Wow. Like a milkshake beer?
That is the exact answer that 95% of the brewers have given.
Yeah.
I can't.
There's a reason for that.
We cannot begin to tell you how many people. I mean, we're on episode. This is, I think, 20
something.
We're in the upper 20s at this point.
Yeah.
And of those, we're at probably, I'm going to say 20 to 23 people have been like, zero milkshake.
Yeah, I mean, ironically, we've made a beer in that style on the pilot system, but it was kind of our version of that, but I actually don't even know too much about them, but from what I've seen and heard and the few that I've tried, I'm just like, it's for other people,
when you were
but not for
talking
me.
earlier, Dave, about the amount of time and like the, beers that are quote unquote easy, but aren't really easy. They're just like more enjoyable to brew and whatever. These hazies and milkshakes that extends your brew day. Not that your brew day already isn't super long. But when you're talking about these heavily hopped, milkshakey, lactosey, all those things, like you've drawn out your day just by hours.
Yeah, it can, like we do it, all the things we do with the end product in mind. So if it's worth getting to the finish line on a beer, we'll make it. But you're absolutely right. It's a lot of times it's more expensive. Like barrel aging is not cheap. Like hazy beers, like the way we make them, they're not the cheapest beers to make. But there's some corners that you just can't cut. So. Well,
you were in good company. Just about everybody has answered the same thing.
Great, yeah.
All right, here's one. A beer that you brewed might have been very popular, but for whatever reason, you're not going to do it again. It wasn't a bomb. Maybe it was, but it doesn't have to be. It could have been something that you really liked, where you're like, it was a one and done.
Yeah. I mean, there's not a lot of beers that we make or have made that are completely off the table. So some of them go away for a little bit, but no one ever forgets about them, especially the good ones. I mean, like the really good ones, the ones that we all can't stop drinking. So the first thing that comes to mind is Bottom Up Wit.
Okay.
Which is our wit style wheat beer that when I started at the company, that was one of our core like canned beers that was going out into the market. And that is just like a fantastic beer. We still brew it, but just in smaller quantities, and it's not regularly available. But what a crusher! Just like a great. I think it's a year-round beer. A lot of people associate that style with summer, but I mean that was kind of our session quote-unquote beer. When I started, it was like pretty much, I mean, Cross of Gold was on the list too, but,
Cross of Gold I really loved.
Yeah.
What makes a wheat beer different than a Hefeweizen?
Sure, yeah. The yeast, I guess that kind of helps tie us back into the top of the episode a little bit. So
that callback.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. That is beautiful.
I'm a professional.
You sure are.
So the yeast, I mean, both those beers that kind of originated in Europe are very yeast forward. So wit yeast versus a hef yeast are going to give you two very different beers. So wit is going to be more, they're both phenolic, but wit's going to have more of that like coriander. We use fresh orange peel in it, or not fresh, we use dried, but you can use fresh as well. And then Hefeweizen is going to have more of that like banana estery character from it. And that almost all comes from the yeast for those beers. Yeah.
All right, your final of the big three. Can be a Rev beer, can be whatever. Your go-to, and you already said this is your shift beer, cold time.
Yeah.
What's your go-to off-the-clock beer?
Lately cold time, I have like 5 answers for this because I mix it up a little bit. But
Let's do it.
Fist City is probably my only answer because that beer, that's our like extra pale ale or hoppy pale ale. I literally remember where I was when I first tried that beer.
Where were you?
At the brewery. I was like walking into the production area. That beer started as a collaboration with Big Star, which is a restaurant, local Mexican restaurant.
My God, everything you're saying is making me miss home.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah. No, but like it just something like the stars aligned for that beer, and it's just like the perfect balance of bitterness and like very hop forward, but in like a kind of classic balanced way. I think it's like 5.5% or so. So yeah, it's hard to say anything else but that beer.
Fist City.
Yeah.
Let's get to a beer trend. We've got a couple minutes left. So Katherine, what's your beer trend for today?
So we're going to talk happy beverages. Happy beverages that are not beer. We're going to talk hop waters. This has been something that we've kind of sort of touched on in the past when we're talking about different consumption patterns, customer behavior, and where we see market share kind of moving. We've talked about seltzer. We've talked about RTDs. We've talked about weed. We've talked about THC beverages. We haven't spent a ton of time on hop water. And it sounds, from its initial name, you're like, oh, just put a hop in some water. No. Making hop water can actually be a little bit tricky based on what you need to use to make it. And I'll let Dave speak to that more. But like the trend of having hop water around, if you are somebody who is taking a break from beer and your brewery is making a hop water, you can still go there and you can enjoy the skill that that brewery has by enjoying their hop water. And also, I will say this loudly, especially for the people in the back. All hop water is not created equal. There are some places that are doing a bang-up job, and there are some places that are not doing a bang-up job. And it's a tricky... I believe hop water is tricky to get correct, right? So you know that you've got some kind of brewery-based beverage there. You're not just drinking like tonic or club soda. You've got like there's a balance to getting it really well. And Revs is great. Revs is wonderful.
Thank you.
So when did Rev start making hop water, and what, to Catherine's point, what goes into? Well, you don't brew it, right?
We do, yeah.
Is that?
Yeah,
that's the right term.
Goes through the brew house, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it doesn't ferment, but yeah, it goes through pretty much all the equipment that we use to brew a beer. It certainly is brewed.
Okay.
Yeah, it's been around for a couple of years now. Super Zero is our hop water, and yeah, that was actually a pretty fun project. So we, we looked at the non-alcoholic beer space and went with hop water just because it's, and I can only speak to the side of things that I saw, but to me, it's a pretty exciting space. It's like, in my opinion, I drink non-alcoholic beer sometimes, but it's almost better to have something that's still non-alcoholic, but it's like shining in its own right.
Right.
I think like a lot of people that drink NA beer, you used to have it with the alcohol in it, or you sometimes have it with the alcohol in it.
Right.
So you're comparing it to that. But yeah, we just decided on like the concept that we wanted, which was fun because there's not a lot of examples out in the market. So you can kind of decide where you want to go. We knew that we didn't want ours to be grungy, but we still wanted...
what does that mean, grungy?
So yeah, grungy is like a descriptor people use to talk about hops that... I guess vegetal or just kind of like plant-like, not citrusy, fruity, floral, just kind of more of those like harsher flavors that you can get from hops, which have their place.
Right.
But we decided that we wanted our hop water to kind of showcase like the more citrusy, kind of like refreshing side of hops without being overpowering and without tasting just like a seltzer that you could buy off the shelf, because then why aren't we making just fruity seltzer? So yeah, Super Zero was a really fun project, and I think it's great it's worth trying just if you have no preconceived notions about it, but also for people that enjoy hops and craft beer that want to try like a non-alcoholic version.
Nice.
Or option, I should say.
Again, like it's a nice way to continue to support your brewery if you're taking a break, if you don't want to go, like if you want one beer and one hop water, whatever.
Yeah.
I also think it's wonderful how Rev sponsors at FOBAB for the past couple of years. You've done the Super Zero Lounge, which is amazing, and gives everyone an opportunity to take a break from real high ABV beers and go and have something that's going to cut everything too. Also, I find hop water to be the most excellent palate cleanser.
Yeah, sure.
Like it's really good.
Yeah.
If you're actually tasting beers, if you're doing a bunch of like side by sides, hop water in between will cut it, and it's really, really nice. I find, but that could just be my palate. But I think, yeah, what you guys are doing and doing things like that for the beer community at large, and then especially having things like that for those festivals, it's just wonderful.
Yeah, it has a lot of places where it's home, and I feel like we're still kind of discovering that. Like the first half of the day, like when a lot of people aren't drinking, like we can drink those at work. Like you can have those at lunch. You can have those outside on the patio at home if you're doing yard work or something like that. So yeah, I think there's like that is a space like in the beer industry non-alcoholic in general, but I think to me things like newer products like hop water, and those types of things are more exciting than just simply trying to recreate, cold time without alcohol. Yeah, because you can do that and it would taste great,
Yeah.
But you kind of we've always liked kind of innovating and deciding what we want to enjoy, what sounds good to us, and then like sharing that with people,
Well, it's obvious that Rev is going to keep innovating, and we didn't even touch on any of the sustainability stuff. There's a million things to talk about, but time is a tyrant, and we have kept you a long time. David Blackford is the lead brewer here at Revolution Brewing. We appreciate your time. But before we let you go, because you got to sit through the big closing credits.
All right.
Katherine, do we have any featured merch today?
We do. We've been talking a lot about stouts today. We've been talking about our Deep Woods series. We just mentioned FOBAB a hot second ago. So our featured merch today is a shirt that says, if you can drink this with a picture of a coffee mug, you can drink this with a picture of a stout. As we all know, if you can have a cup of coffee in the morning, you can have a stout in the evening. Everybody grow up and drink a stout. That's our featured merch
Listen
today.
to Cody, get some Deep Woods, and enjoy yourself. Well, thanks to everybody for joining us on this edition of Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer. Be sure to support your local brewery. Without your support, it's rough going for some of your favorite breweries. Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer is produced by award-winning podcast producer Cody Goff. You can read our blog, grab some merch, check out episodes, and get in touch with us on our website, craftybrewerspod.com. Do you have a brewery you'd like us to talk to? Are you a brewer? I don't know, like David Blackford, and you're thinking, boy, he doesn't look that in pain from talking to these guys. Maybe we'd like to be on the show. Drop us a line. You have a trend or something you wanted to discuss? Drop us a line, craftybrewerspod@gmail.com. Katherine, where can they follow us on the socials?
You can find us on Instagram. We're at crafty_brewers_pod. Sorry. We are over on Instagram. We are also on Facebook, Crafty Brewers Tales Behind Craft Beer. You can find us there. Follow us everywhere. And if I may, because I'm going to start throwing this in all the time, if you can share pictures of your dinner, you can share pictures of your podcasts. If your friends want to see your kids, your friends want to know what you're listening to. Share.
There you go. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, please tap your phone, give us a 5-star rating. We always like that. Thanks again to David Blackford. He is the lead brewer for Revolution Brewing. Go to revbrew.com. I'm not going to give you both addresses because you're not going to remember them. Go to revbrew.com. Pick one of the places. Both are fantastic. If you want to just drink and see the huge production brewery, go to the tap room. If you want to drink great beer and have some delicious food, come here to the brew pub. It's that easy, and we don't make it too complicated. For Crafty Brewers, Tales Behind Craft Beer, she's Katherine Vallow.
He's Brian Noonan.
Any parting words?
Knowledge is power.
Fight the power.
No, just knowledge. Just soak all of the knowledge in. Now, arm yourself with knowledge.
Fight the
this
power.
is an important time.
Who are we fighting?
To be arming ourselves with
We're
knowledge.
fighting the power.
I'm with Katherine. I'm a little. I think the knowledge is the power, right? Is what we're
Right.
trying.
Cody, the man has his boot on our necks. Fight the power.
Okay.
I'm saying that you need to. This is the time for us to arm ourselves with knowledge because knowledge is power. That's it.
All right.
I'm going to grab another beer.
Yeah, we're going to go drink. Thanks. Cheers.